Well, we've taken the left side off, the right side off today. We split it down the middle. This stud here, 6mm, runs right through the case and has a dome nut on the top of it, and it's one corner of the oil filter housing. It needs to be unscrewed. Now I've just actually unscrewed it, but I found a stud remover, Star Willie number 6. In the end of it, it's got 3 balls that go on, and you can put that down over a stud, and you can remove or tighten. I'm tightening that at the moment because those 3 balls lock in. If I turn it the other way, the balls lock in the other way, and I can remove it. And I did that just a moment ago with this stud, and it's came out easily. So I'll get that out of the way so it doesn't get bent while I'm moving things around. That was a bit of footage that should have been included yesterday. One of the first things the book says to do is to remove the reversing switch and the detent as part of this case separation, which is what I'm up to doing today. I've cracked that reversing switch already. It's a 27mm fitting. It's coming out with all its shit, and the detent was a 19mm. It's unscrewing as well. So I don't know whether the detent's going to have a spring behind it or something. Let's see. No, I can't feel any pressure on it much at the moment. She's a long bolt so far. Okay, that might be a spring-loaded tip. Yes, it is. So, yes, that's spring-loaded pin in that detent. And let's have a look at the reversing switch. There it's coming out. It looks like another spring-loaded switch, so it should be good. That's those 2 parts done. I'll move on. I've gone around and removed crankcase half bolts from this left-hand side. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this one is broken away at the top, and that's 4 that are mentioned separately in the book, and then there's 5 up here. This one has been dented. That was difficult to get out because it was jamming the bolt. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's the last one there. And then internally, there's 2 in the generator area. 1 here and 1 there, and then there's an M8 bolt goes down through that hole. They're the only 3 inside the case. And around this side there are 2 bolts that double here for the reversing bracket. There's 3 points it mounts on there and up here. So I've got all those. It's ready to turn over. I'm going to leave the neutral switch in place. It hasn't said to remove it yet, and from what I can see, it's not going to affect the case pulling apart. So I'm just going to leave it there until I might read later on that you have to move it. Okay, the book calls for just a few bolts out of this side. There's 3, 1, 2, and 3. And then there's an M8 bolt out of here that's got a copper washer on it. And there's 2 at the front, 1 here and 1 there. So that's everything. That's the transmission case undone. Damage on this side, there's a bolt that holds the exhaust on sheared off there. I think there was one sheared off there in that same place on my first quad. There's the engine number, J4171111548. Now, it'd be interesting to date the engine from that if somebody knows how to do that. I've included in this kit of parts for this side the sump plug for here and the strainer off there, just to make this particular collection of parts a little bit more significant. Time to move on and see how separating these cases happens. I've just got this case to crack or split across the back here, which is where it was binding the most, and it's released all the other way now, but it was bound up through here. I'm thinking there's a dowel. I'm guessing I'm going to find a dowel in here, which was probably binding and heat and that yield material. But even with all of that, there was nowhere I could see to hit across the back here to try and I could hit on this lug here to knock that side up, and I could see from about here through to the front, after I had some lunch, was starting to move a little bit. I put yield down all of the holes and heated the whole case a little bit to try and get the yield to run in, to try and find where it was binding. But I think the main place it was binding was across the back here. And what I've just discovered, which made it move, is the up inside these holes, there's a lip at the other end there that this bar could get some purchase on. And I did that for both those holes, and that's what got that crack across there. So I've spent a couple of hours mucking around, not trying to force anything too much, and it's started to come only in the last 5 minutes. Now, also, I've hollowed out some of the crap that was in here. This is next to where the starter motor's broken out, and there was like quite a mound of stuff in there, and I don't know whether it was dirt or corroded bits of aluminium off the actual starter housing or what it was, but I chipped away at it. There's still a chunk sitting there at the moment of whatever it is, and it was almost like concrete, but I don't think it is as quite as bad as it looks through there. So the repair for this starter motor is starting to look a lot more simpler. I think there's a sheared off bolt here, and I thought there should have been another one over that side somewhere. Once I get this casing off, I'll be able to set it up in the milling machine and address that problem. Anyway, I'll keep tapping away now that I've got a split in these cases, and the manual said, "Oh, be careful when you take all the bolts out, the case might fall apart, or it might need a bit of a tap, or it might need a steering wheel puller type special tool to get it apart." Well, I think that manual's been written expecting you to be working on a 7-year-old machine, not a 35-year-old machine. It's been sitting in the shit for a long time, and yeah, I think when corrosion's got in around dowel pins and things, it makes everything a whole lot harder. But we're on our way. Okay, I've devised a method of sort of holding the gap open by shoving a cable tie in. Now the start of a cable tie is sort of tapered. The start of a cable tie is tapered, and initially I only had the gap open enough to shove just the end in, and then it gets to the wider section and stops. But I've now got it, the wider section passing through, and as I tap, I've been able to get that one through there, and this one through the corners, another one round the side there. And one of the problems in sort of tapping on one corner, it tends to close up an opposite corner, and hopefully these cable ties are soft enough to not affect the aluminium. So I've got one thickness of cable tie in the gap at the moment. As it widens, I might be able to get two thicknesses in there and keep levering effectively on the nylon of the cable tie to get it to creep up. So that's a method. I've been so frustrated with this coming apart when the book said it could potentially fall apart. Well, it certainly hasn't fallen apart on me. It's putting up some resistance. I'm tapping on the shafts. The book says to do that. I think there's probably now bearings that need to pop out of the aluminium casing, and something's still binding. If I gently goes, hopefully I can get it to raise. So I've gone from cable ties jacking this crack open to pieces of tongue and groove, or yellow tongue. I think that just released when I tried it then, so I'll stop and continue. Well, I got the part. What can I show you? There's parts of the reversing gear, a shim, a spacer, and a bearing, and a pin, which I don't exactly know the order. I can guess at what order they fit there. There's a hole here that I suspect that came out of, and a gear there that it probably meshes with. But I might go back to the manual just to check which order the side the shim goes in and things like that. Idler shaft here, and set of forks here, two sets that sort of work independently off the traces on this barrel, and that barrel cocks around. There's a little spring-loaded pin in the end there that falls out for the neutral sensor. This is the reverse lever which operates the fork that engages the gear that cuts in for reverse. In my last video I rambled on about internal gears in here, and I don't think there was an extra setting. So I've got a gear here which I believe is the reversing gear. I've got a spacer, a thick spacer. I've got a bushing. I've got a shim, and I've got a pin, and I believe those parts are here. Number 27 is called a bearing, where I'd call it just a spacer. 28, reversing idler gear. 29 is a reverse idler gear bushing, makes sense. 30 is the reverse idler gear shaft, and 17, it's calling it a bearing. Again, it probably is a thrust bearing, if you like. There's other bearings also that are basically just thrust bearings. So 17 is called a bearing. and they're the parts that go on this shaft, and it looks like it goes spacer, cog, bushing, pin, shim, and I believe that all goes down in this hole here, and it's hard to say which way around. You'd think from that diagram there, number 28, would show the cog in this way with the large part on the other side, and it's not shown on the drawing. I'm going to set it up that way. It's a little strange. I thought it probably jacked the cog up a bit too high, but we'll see. I'll set it up that way and see what it looks like. Here's a couple of diagrams of the gear cluster that I need to study, get my head around it, and work out how this shifts properly. Well, I went to move this left-hand case and I dropped it down on my wooden block, not very heavily, and it just knocked the crankshaft out of the lower bearing here. And I noticed that this output shaft from the sub-trans just pulled out easily from its bearing in there. So while I was at it, I just gave the final drive a knock, and it's out. So I think that's everything released from this left-hand case. The bearings that I'm feeling all seem fine. I haven't found a gritty one at all at this stage, so that one there, okay, that one there grated a little bit for a moment. Maybe it's had some shit come in from the outside, but there's a fair amount of shit over the top of it there as it sits there, and so it probably just needs a wash and see what it feels like then. But they're all the main big shafts all sitting there, and there's no apparent issues with any of the teeth on anything that I've come across so far. It looks good. Got to get my head around how these clusters work and how the selector forks work. I think I worked out how that reversing gear works. It's sort of drawn in some ways, you think back to front, but then if you look at the right hand side of the page, then the right hand side of the page is this case, and therefore everything goes in the way the diagram is. It just looks like it's backwards, and it actually meshes with the bottom, a gear on the very bottom there and a gear on the very bottom there. That one there I'm rotating with my finger, and a gear under there, which makes sense. The reversing fork must operate down there somehow too, and we'll work it out. This here is an interesting thing. There's a pipe across there, and there's some material, the actual breather for the airbox, or this is, I suspect, the crankcase breather, sucks any fumes and things through that mesh. This breather to the airbox would suck fumes and things out of the crankcase. If there's oil in those fumes, that they may condense and run back down this tube. But anyway, it's a part. That's probably all I'm going to do today. I'm going to go ahead and edit this bit of footage up. I think I've got a good crank there. I've actually got quite a good crankcase. Question is it worth, all that's really wrong here is there's a couple of shoot-off screws. There's that hole in the crankcase up near the starter motor. There's a damaged small bolt around the periphery on the bottom of the motor, wherever that is. All things that are quite minor, and everything internally seems fine. So but by swapping crankcases, you'd want all the gears and everything to be good in the other case, otherwise you start mucking around with shim sizes and stuff that suits one set of cogs and not your set of cogs. So it'd be interesting what sort of damage might be apparent in the other case. Anyway, I'll finish off there today. So why don't you go and buy a bit of junk and get out to your shed and fix it up?